and welcome to the Kink Perspective. My name's Chris. I'm a psychotherapist and consultant. On today's show, I want to kind of dive into an aspect of dominance and submission that kind of really lies at the heart of our total power exchanges, our TPE, or our erotic power exchanges, our EPE. It's a subject that kind of got brought up to me. I've seen a few people starting to talk about it on social media, especially in the newer aspects of relationships and things that were starting to happen within weeks or months of some people starting to get together. And it does really lie at the heart of some of the things that do transpire between a couple inside of some BDSM dynamics. So what am I talking about today? Well, today I want to talk about punishments. Now, punishments aren't just about correction. They are powerful tools that can shape dynamics and behaviors and trust within a DS relationship. Now, understanding the psychological aspects involved, it's not only crucial for both dominants, but it really is crucial for submissives alike. And it's really not about enforcing consequences here. It's about navigating emotions and building trust, maintaining the delicate balance of the power dynamic. So today, I really want to go into the intricacies of punishments in DS relationships. I want to talk about the responsibilities of the dominant in teaching and guiding. And this is kind of a really big thing for me because when I talk to people and they will ask me about punishments and my thoughts on them, I'm always a little bit intrigued because my response after being in this lifestyle for as long as I have, for over 2+ decades, I have never given a punishment. And I always get people who look at me kind of oddly when I say that. Now, I give the long-winded explanation, and I'm going to a little bit later, why I don't do punishments and why I don't even find that they are necessary. And I'm not going to go into bratting and stuff today because that's a whole different topic. But I think punishments do hold a certain place, but there are times and places for it. And I think if a dominant and submissive are working really well and steadfastly inside of their DS relationship, then punishments or the need for them is never going to arise. So I also want to talk about some of the common pitfalls here to avoid, maybe how to foster healthier disciplinary environments that promotes a lot of growth and understanding. So I think first here, we need to understand punishments. And not just the definition, but their purpose. Now, punishments within the context of DS is something that's always been around. If you are given an order and you are told to do it, and you fail to do it, on the one side of the slash, you're punished for maybe insubordination or disobedience. And in this context of DS, relationships really are structured through consequences, and these consequences are designed to address deviations from any of the agreed upon rules or expectations or negotiations that you have created. Now, they serve as a dual purpose here for correction and reinforcement, and they're deeply rooted in the dynamics of power exchange. Now, from a BDSM perspective, punishments are not merely disciplinary actions, but really they could be looked at as rituals that symbolize the authority of the dominant and the submission of the submissive. And they can establish a framework of accountability where dominants exercise control while guiding the submissive towards personal growth and adherence to established protocols. Now, what you're going to hear, or what you just heard me say, is I'm emphasizing certain words where I'm saying it can be this or it can be that. And I'm going to inject here because now I'm giving you one side of this, but I'm going to also give a lot of my personal perspective on this. I think on this side here that I've never understood the need inside of, let's say, even in the first, especially in the first year of DS. I've never understood the need to punish a submissive. And I'll explain why. If you are actually going to enter a very serious DS relationship where the submissive is going to offer up the power exchange, the dominant's going to be willing to take over control and all the essential requirements behind it, all of the structure is going, and I'm not trying to pick on dominance here, right? But everything we are agreeing to do, that is now on us. So I look at when I'm getting involved with the submissive, even if I understand what they basically know, I'm going to be teaching them the ways of things that I want. So there should be a learning curve, a very steep learning curve. Now, I already understand personally, from my perspective, they are probably not going to meet my expectations, but that's okay. Because the reality is then that means we practice again, we try again, we go through it again. I will even acknowledge, hey, you're going to screw up the first couple of times. You might be nervous doing something, or you may not have memorized or you haven't practiced enough. That's okay. Did I check in enough with my submissive, and did I ask these questions? And these are the important things going on, because we're so quick to go, okay, well, I expect you to, I'm just going to use a name, Molly, I expect you to go ahead and do X, Y, and Z. And here's a couple of pictures and their explanations as to why you need to memorize all these by next week. Well, maybe she has to work. She's got family commitments and, I don't know, religious or maybe educational stuff going on. But then on top of that, we're throwing something else new on there. And maybe there's some limited contact. I'm checking in to see how she's doing. If she has questions, I'm just saying figure it out. I'm not really providing a whole lot of guidance. My expectation for Molly to pass is pretty much 0. I've actually set her up to fail. And we tend to do this a lot inside of DS dynamics. We are setting ourselves up to fail. And this is multi-sided. It's both the dominant and the submissive. The submissive, instead of speaking up and saying, well, I might need some help with this, or I might need some more time, or I'm going to have some questions that are really not coming back. Or let alone, why am I doing this? What is the purpose of this exercise? So we're not failing. All the things that we should be doing inside of these dynamics that we're not doing. And so then we tend to lean towards what? A reinforcement type, a disciplinary type of enforcement to get the tasks done. Does that actually help? My opinion on that is no. I know for some they think they're going to make it work, but then what we are actually doing is we're scaring people into doing something through the perception if they don't get it right, they're going to disappoint their dominant. So we're motivating them through fear, not through affirmation and not through validation. And then we're punishing them if they don't get it done correctly when they haven't even had the proper guidance. So I've deviated a little bit here. I still want to kind of continue on this point of the whole definition of purpose. And let's get into this whole psychological dynamics here. Now, the psychological impact of punishments is profound and it's tiered. Now, for a submissive, for example, the experience of receiving a punishment can invoke complex emotions like guilt, shame, or even a sense of vulnerability. And these emotions are intimately tied to their desire to please their dominant and maintain the integrity of the power dynamic. But psychologically, punishments can reinforce their commitment to their role, and this is where this whole providing this structured means of self-correction and growth within the relationship is possible, but they can, and I often have found, they elicit the feelings of shame or letting someone down, guilt because they couldn't complete the task. Now, there is things about, we can look at the means of self-correction and growth within the relationship by understanding what the punishment is, or it might make somebody feel more submissive and apt to surrender in the relationship, which can deepen the emotional and psychological bond between the dominant and the submissive. But again, where I struggle when I'm reading this, looking at some of this literature, and I'm talking about different punishments like through operant conditioning and all of these other things, where this kind of congruence starts to happen. Now, from a dominant perspective, administering punishment requires really a base level understanding of the psychological dynamics here. It involves balancing authority with empathy, ensuring punishments aren't just effective in correcting behavior, but support their growth and emotional well-being of the submissive. Now, this process underscores the importance of clear communication and trust within the dynamic, because then what you're looking at is hopefully effective punishments which are negotiated and consented to some extent beforehand, which create an environment where both parties feel the ability to grow and navigate the complexities of the power exchange. But now, in essence here, the punishments in DS transcend the mere disciplinary actions, or we're at least often told in the community this is how it should work, that they're this transformative experience that reinforces the dynamic and strengthens mutual trust and promotes all this personal growth by the dominant and submissive. But I have a problem with this when I read this literature, and I'm wanting to give both sides here of this argument. My problem again comes in is how can we say we're going to punish somebody who's new or is learning with a new dominant that they're wrong if I'm giving directions and not providing a lot of specific guidance. And I should be. I should be literally at that point making sure each step along the process is being done. I remember one time training somebody who was quite young, and it took a long time. We were talking a couple of months of discussions before we even got into anything. We learned a lot about, we started negotiating some things, and this was over a decade plus ago. And I explained everything, and I remember the first time we were going to go through a baseline inspection. So we were doing inspection positions and training for all these things, more of a high protocol type of atmosphere. And the reality was, I knew she was nervous, but I explained, it's okay, you're going to screw up. I'm not going to be angry. I'm not going to be disappointed. This is for you to train and understand. Now, hopefully, after the course of about 4 to 6 weeks, you're going to have these down pat. Then we move on to the next thing. And this helped her build her confidence up. She knew that my expectations of her getting it perfect, even though she'd been trying, there was always going to be a margin for error. And that's okay. That's the the room we want to work in. Because I don't want her to feel that at the time that she couldn't get these things done and didn't please me. The effort was already pleasing, but I think a lot of times with dominance in the lifestyle, they put an expectation out there, or the submissive puts an expectation out there that they're going to get it right the first time, and then it's reinforced that they didn't get it right, and then they are punished, and they don't really even understand why they're being punished in the first place. This creates a negative emotional feed and negativity, I believe, negativity inside of a dynamic. So this really does lead me to this next part of the dominance role in teaching, especially when it comes down to the educational responsibility. Now, when we look at DS relationships, and we all understand that dominants assume this role as teacher and guide, particularly in the early stages of the relationship, 6 months in, first year in. Beyond the whole physical aspects of control and discipline, the dominant is responsible for imparting knowledge, setting the expectations, nurturing the growth, and working within the agreed parameters of the dynamic. And the educational role here extends beyond the mere instruction. It encompasses cultivating a deep understanding of each other's needs and boundaries and desires. It's effective teaching, really. And it involves clear communication and patience and commitment to the growth of the relationship and our expectations, not only for the submissive, but even for ourselves as a dominant. And ensures that both of us are feeling empowered and that we're supportive. And we really start to understand about this learning curve here. And it's essential to recognize that mistakes are going to be a natural part of a learning process in any relationship, especially when we get into something like DS, because punishments should be approached judiciously, primarily as a means to correct behavior rather than a consequence of a misunderstanding and errors in teaching. And I really think that's where a lot of people are using this. Now, if in this example where I said, I gave somebody 6 weeks, now she had 6 weeks, we've corrected mistakes, she's done her positions, great, we've moved on to something else, and I decide to revisit an inspection. And we come back, and she hasn't kept up with it, she totally flounders everything. We might have one more, she might get one more pass at doing it again. And if she fails again, then we have to address the situation of whether it's a learning curve issue, if it's a retention issue, or if it's just willfully doesn't want to retain the information. What is it? Where am I missing the piece? But everything in that first year, as far as I'm concerned, falls upon the dominant. I'm not saying that submissives are absolved. If submissives are coming in and are being willfully disrespectful or willfully not trying to do anything, sure, then I might reevaluate the relationship as a whole if I've got somebody who's willfully not trying to learn. And then at that point, I might just say, you know what, this isn't really working out between the two of us. I don't think we're a great fit. I feel like what I'm trying to impart, you're not willing to learn, or there's a learning curve, too much too difficult to handle, so we're going to just go ahead and go our own ways. But other than that, it is the dominant's ability to discern between genuine lapses in behavior and misunderstandings. And this is a crucial point. And this requires sensitivity to the submissive's emotional responses and their willingness to adjust to disciplinary practices accordingly. Now, if I prioritize clear communication and understanding, the Dom creates this environment where mistakes are opportunities for growth rather than a reason for punitive measures. And I think that's highly important. I think a lot of us move out of that. I think a lot of us have turned punishments into something meant to be having fun. To me, if I see a submissive acting out, the first thing is I'm not criticizing the submissive. I'm actually curious and judging and probably being a little bit judgmental of the dominant. If this is how their submissive is acting in a public environment where they're running around and screaming their head off and acting like a child, and they're claiming they're in this massive DS dynamic, then I'm curious what the dominant knows, what the dominant is teaching or imparting to their submissive, or how that is acting. Because if they're outside of that whole bratting dynamic, and I haven't done a show on that yet, and I do have an issue with brats, sorry, that's not a targeted thing. It's just not for me. But if I see this type of behavior, I tend to look at it as a reflection of what the dominant is teaching, not so much necessarily on the submissive themselves. Now, if we begin to understand the complexities of the Dom's educational role, which involves navigating all of this depth inside of the power exchange, we start to see that there is a lot of empathy and insight that goes into it. It does require a lot of commitment to continuous learning and adaptation as the relationships evolve over time. If there are questions, we need to have the answers or be willing as dominants to find the answer if we don't know. We can send our submissives on explorations to learn about topics that we may know about, but what if they come across a topic that interests them? Then it's our responsibility as a dominant to go out and learn about it to some degree, whether we, at least if worst case scenario, is to become familiar with the topic. It doesn't mean we have to get involved with it, but it's a better understanding helps our dynamic grow. Now, by nurturing all of this, the Dom not only enhances the submissive's experience of submission, but it enriches their understanding of leadership and responsibility within the DS dynamic itself. And the dominant's role in teaching does go beyond just enforcing rules, laying down the hammer, and breaking out the belt. It encompasses us guiding the submissive towards their growth, the understanding between the two of us, and the learning curve of the dynamic with empathy and respect for both parties involved, especially carrying that burden inside of the first year of the dynamic. Now, I want to kind of get into some of the things what I've been reading about with the common mistakes and even the early or overuse of punishments. Now, some of the early challenges I've seen and read about as the DS relationships evolve, they encounter a lot of common pitfalls that do hinder the growth and stability of their dynamic. One of the prevalent challenges I've come across is the inconsistent enforcement of rules and punishment when the rules aren't consistently applied. And I'm going to say that again. When rules aren't consistently applied, it leads to a lot of confusion, not only for the submissive, but even for the dominant. But this does create frustration for the submissive. It undermines the structure of the relationship and the clarity of the foundation of the DS relationship itself. Now, overly harsh punishments can have the unintended consequences as well, such as resentment or emotional withdrawal, especially if they exceed the submissive's negotiated limits or expectations. And these mistakes here highlight the importance of maintaining balance and sensitivity when you are in a disciplinary role conducting these types of practices. And they do have an impact on the dynamics themselves. Overusing punishments, I see that quite often, and they significantly impact the dynamic of the DS relationship, and they erode trust. They create a negative emotional impact in space inside of the DS between two people. Now, punishments, when they're administered excessively or without due consideration for the submissive's well-being, undermine this intimate part of the essential DS dynamic. And submissives might feel discouraged or demotivated, if you will, leading to a breakdown in communication and mutual understanding. The erosion of trust can manifest in reluctance to engage in the dynamic or even resentment towards their dominant. And when we're going through and navigating these challenges, we have to understand as a dominant that being clear and empathetic and have a commitment to the submissive's needs and our own, and respect the boundaries that we are creating on both sides. It's not just one-sided here. But by addressing mistakes promptly and with sensitivity, we can mitigate the negative impacts of overuse or inconsistency. But if I, as the dominant, am being inconsistent, then I, as the dominant, I am the one who is at fault. But this whole process involves ongoing dialogue, reflection, and ensuring that punishments serve their intended purpose of behavior correction. But first, I think we have to go further and understand why the behavior needs to be corrected in the first place before we are surreptitiously just applying a blanket punishment for what can seem for no good cause. Now, if we do this, it is sometimes about putting dominance ego in check. And I'm not here, again, I don't like beating up a dominance and to get a rough ride anyways, but the reality is I think some of us need to not lean so much into the dominant side, and there is a massive difference between male dominance and female dominance, and there is a reality to that. And I think we have two different approaches. I think male dominance, if we lean too hard, we may know a little bit easier when to stop on a punishment than maybe a dominatrix or two that I've come across. I personally know quite a few domes in my time, and I know that sometimes their punishments are far harder and applied a little bit more liberally than the things that I have that I have seen applied punishments for by other dominants that are male. And I think it's an interesting curve, but I don't have all the data in the world to support whose punishments are harsher or what the case may be. There's no way to really research that because that would require something and a lot of data, and I don't have the time to collect that. It would be an interesting approach, and if you're listening and you're interested, we're going to talk about that in the comment section a little bit later. Now, are there any healthy approaches here? Are there any guidelines we can do? Well, I think first and foremost is our psychological and emotional well-being. And maintaining psychological safety here is really one of the more important things inside of any relationship. But I think more so, especially during the administration of a punishment. Punishments should, if you're going to do them, need to be fair and proportionate to what's happened. And maybe discussing stuff beforehand to ensure that there's a mutual understanding of if I teach you this and I show you a few times and you still fail at it, that this is going to be the consequence. When or how that's applied could be a different story. But that way, people can understand it might happen. But the concept of psychological safety here involves creating this environment where someone feels secure enough in expressing their boundaries and concerns without the fear of judgment or reprisal. And that's one thing we shouldn't be doing as dominants. We're not using a punishment to get back at our submissive for doing something just because we disagreed, right? These are all things that should be negotiated in the beginning of your relationships, and you should be having these conversations. It's why I tell people all the time, you should be spending 2 to 3 months talking about every subject you can come across before you're really engaging in play. This is what we used to do 20 and 30 years ago before, everything went really mainstream and where it is now. And people are looking at this concept thinking it is so foreign. That talking, why should I just talk? I want to jump in. I know everything. I promise you, even after 25 years, I don't know everything about the lifestyle. What I do know is that I'm willing to consistently learn and understand and grow to make myself feel better about the knowledge I'm acquiring. But that's a whole, different substrata of this. The reality here is, though, if we have a foundation of trust, which we know is essential for a DS dynamic. For effective disciplinary practices to promote growth and respect in this dynamic, everybody has to be on the same page. Now, why might a dominant want to consider consent for and be very clear about that inside of a dynamic? Because if you're not telling people, if it's your thing, that you want to enforce or you use punishments, and then you come across and they might feel like they haven't consented to that. They don't want to be, maybe spanked or kneel on rice that's been soaked in rubbing alcohol in the corner for 40 minutes. They may not want to do that. A couple of these different things that I'm suggesting is that I know of punishments that have been used. Or sitting in a room that's really cold, completely nude, kneeling in the corner, facing the wall for a half an hour, like treating them like a child. The punishments are effective, but they are also psychological, and they have an impact. We actually even have to have a discussion after the punishment is over on why. And so it was clear that the behavior maybe won't be repeated, or the whole point of the punishment itself in the beginning. I've had friends of mine ask me for thoughts on punishments, and after I ask why they believe they need it, and they have to usually give me a very clear and convincing argument for me to think of something for them, and that comes from the sadist side. Once I understand why they want to do it, then I might offer some insight. But I really don't believe in punishments. I believe two people should be working towards a solution so things can be on the same even keel. And if not, then, well, again, the person in charge is usually the one that's at fault. Everybody else is just following the rules. Now, that's not a blanket statement to just say, oh, well, I can fuck off and do whatever I want. And, hey, there's no consequences. Because that's not true either. Again, that's getting more towards a different type of behavior. I'm not really interested in that. And that discussion is going to be for another day. But here, there is some adaptation and growth that we can see. Now, as we understand that our dynamics grow over time and that they deepen and things shift, we have to understand that dominants have to remain flexible in our approach to disciplinary practices. And adapting these methods as the relationship matures and the submissive's needs evolve. Now, this flexibility allows for adjustments that align with both partners' emotional and psychological growth, our romantic growth, if you will, depending if your dynamic goes in that direction. But this allows us to ensure that the punishments continue to serve their intended purpose of behavior correction and personal development. This is why I have such a problem with people who use quote-unquote punishments. That's fun punishments. That's people, again, doing stuff so they can just be punished instead of just doing a scene. I tend to find the behavior disrespectful, but again, there's usually one demographic inside of this lifestyle that does that. That's more a personal thing. That's fine if you do it. That your kink is not my kink. I just find your kink disrespectful. And it's okay for me to say that. It's okay for me to have that opinion. You can agree with it. You can disagree with it. That's not on me. That's on you. I'm just not into this lifestyle for the non-lack of discipline and control. I like that aspect. That's why I'm a dominant. But no matter what we're doing inside of these things, we have to remember that by doing and growing together, we commit to a dynamic that is responsive and sustainable, and we're on the same page and we understand it. Now, I've really kind of these practices here, the things I've talked about today, go far beyond just correction. They are rituals that shape our dynamics and create growth and deepen the trust that we have for one another. And as long as we understand this and understand that there are psychological areas of punishments from their role of whether it's reinforcing behaviors that we want or that we no longer want, or even if it's the emotional complexities that can be evoked for both parties when a punishment happens. But we need to make sure that regardless of why we're doing them, that this, especially in the first year, that dominants are the ones that are in this educational role. We're not just taking the role as leader or guide, if you will, through an experience for the DS dynamic. We are the ones agreeing to saying, we're going to teach you. We're going to show you. and we want to make you better. Now, again, that's not a pass for submissives just to go and do what they want and screw up intentionally. Screwing up intentionally just tells me you have no desire and I've chosen the wrong person and I need to move on. Right? But as long as we reflect on some of these common mistakes and we understand the impacts, and yeah, okay, I've offered you a lot of my own insight to all of this and shared some things, and I've tried to give a balanced approach to this. But the one thing that is really, truly clear here is we have to be able to communicate often. We obviously need our consent whenever we're doing our practices, but we need to understand the very need and nature of why we want a form of punishment that might be disciplinary related in our dynamics before we get to that stage. At least I think that's a valuable conversation to have. Because if we're not doing that, then what's the whole point of them in the first place? Well, I told you to kneel. You kneeled, but you didn't kneel the right way. Well, you didn't show me how to kneel. Well, great. Now I'm going to show you how to kneel, but I'm going to punish you again. We're doing all these things, and we're getting somebody to jump from one foot to the next, and it's not helpful. I can't imagine anyone who constantly feels like they're screwing up and not pleasing somebody that's going to want to stick around. They're going to say, screw this, it's too difficult. Dominants subsequently are going to probably run through a lot of submissives that way. DS relationships are about, they're not primarily created just to enforce rules. It's a relationship about growth and erotic desire and fantasy and invoking this life of control and power exchange between two consenting adults. But to do that, you have to make sure you understand you're on the same page together. And you can't do that if you don't understand what each other wants and are clear about inside of the rules that you both have chosen. I know it's a lot to digest a little bit today. I know I've asked you a little bit more than I typically do, or I talked a little bit more maybe on my personal side than I'm used to, but I think some people really quite appreciate that because I'm going to give my take on this. So I want to leave you all with a question today as I kind of wrap up the show here. Do you actually believe punishments are essential for maintaining structure and discipline within your dynamic? Why or why not? I have my opinion, and I've given you my opinion today. I'd like to hear yours. So I'm going to, this is going to go up on Spotify. There'll be the question there. I'll put the question up on my social on FetLife. You can do it there. I want to kind of give some formal announcements on something. I did start my other podcast, but I have come to the conclusion it is a lot of work doing a true crime podcast. It's a lot of work for me to do besides my practice and this show and writing every day and other commitments I have. So for the time being, I'm going to be suspending my other show, or I might do like an episode per month. I just don't I don't have the teams of people that a lot of these shows do where they have 2, 3, 4 people working together to create a podcast episode. So for now, the BDSM podcast, Blood, Death, Sex, and Murder, is not necessarily on hiatus, but it's definitely going to go to a slowdown thing. So if you are wondering why there's no more new episodes for a while, that's it. But I did conclude the first case, which was that Brent Christensen, which actually had direct ties to FetLife. So if you're interested, that first case is up there. There's 3 episodes there. Like I said, we'll see depending on the response I get. My book, yes, it is still out. It's available. The print version is there if you'd like to pick it up. Get it wherever you buy books, or the e-version is there. I do want to say, if you first time listening to me here, please like, subscribe. I do talk about a lot of things in the lifestyle. I answer questions, or I'm going to do podcasts on questions that I'm getting. Today, this was about obviously punishments and their role inside of a DS dynamic. But I believe next week I'm going to be going into the psychology behind CNC. I'm going to do my best to bring that to life because that question got posed to me. So I'm going to try to answer everything that I can when I get to it. If you want to support my work here, please do. I appreciate it. Anything big or small, there is a donation link on my Spotify. I'm going to put one up in the description as well. You can donate big or small. Anything does help. Helps me keep the show going. I'm not putting my show behind a paywall, so if you don't want to, that's fine. I don't expect anything for it. But anything does help me let me know that, you're fans of the show and you want to support what I'm doing and keep it going from there. But again, if you do like the show, please like, subscribe, click the follow button, rate me 5 stars on Spotify. This allows me to reach out to even more people and get this information out there to everybody. But let me know your thoughts on the show today about punishments and where you sit with them inside of your dynamic, or as a dominant, maybe what's your perspective on punishments? I'd love to hear it. So I know it's a really interesting subject. I think, though, just again, for me, my personal stance is, so I'm the teacher and that responsibility lies with me first. I know it's a different take on the lifestyle and everything else. Hopefully you all found it refreshing. But with that said, everybody, until next time, be safe, stay kinky.